All right, everybody, welcome in to Pickaxe and Roll. I almost said alley-oop. I don't know why I said that, but welcome to the Pickaxe and Roll podcast. Now I'm all flustered. Look at me, Jesus! Very excited to have on my guest CTFazio from NBA Twitter. He's just killing it right now for Denver Nuggets coverage. You're still writing for Crown Hoops. You're still doing a bunch of stuff, but I think a whole bunch of people are super excited about your Denver Nuggets contributions and your NBA draft contributions. You are a shining star, as I said before the podcast started. Thank you so much for dropping by, my friend. How are you?
Hey, Ryan, doing well. Thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. This is 3 years in a row now, so I think we've got a little, continuous show going, so that's great. But always great to tune into the show and to be on it tonight. So that's great. Looking forward to talking draft and Nuggets with you.
We've got some rhythm going, and I think we've had some success in talking about some of the guys that the Nuggets have ultimately selected. We both brought up Christian Braun as a name that the Nuggets would be targeting back in 2022. Yep. We both brought up Julian Strawther that the Nuggets would be targeting in 2023. They certainly surprised us in some of the other selections that they made, but Peyton Watson has worked out, and we will see about Jalen Pickett and Hunter Tyson, who are on full deals, and we'll hopefully get some more contributions going forward. But there's nobody that I want to talk to more at this point in time than you, because you have the proper blend between looking forward and looking at the now of what the Nuggets are doing, what the NBA is looking like, and what the draft prospects are looking like in the upcoming classes. I got to tell you, I fake it until I make it on so much of this draft coverage. I do what I can while trying to cover the Denver Nuggets full time. But as somebody who tries to do as much thinking of the now and kind of projecting for the Nuggets specifically, I totally respect the ability to actually do both of those things at the same time. So looking forward to all the draft analysis. And everybody, if you aren't already following CT, make sure to go follow him at CTFazio24 on Twitter for all of the best work possible. Now I'm supposed to let you say something and acknowledge what I said.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words. But yeah, no, the draft's been, it's been fun, going, after the Brown draft that we did. That was the first draft that we talked about. Strawther last year. I think it was a different set of circumstances after the championship last year. Just seeing, which direction the Nuggets would go. I know me and you, we didn't think they'd take three guys, to the roster. And that was definitely a shock to us. I know we kind of talked about Strawther a lot, and Brown in the year before that. So I think the Pickett and the Tyson selections were definitely surprising, especially that Booth gave them multi-year guaranteed deals too. But yeah, no, this draft, they have 28-56. So I'm pretty excited to see which direction they go this time. And, I know we got some names to discuss.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. The draft is always, especially in this range where Denver's got two picks in the late areas, 28 and 56. You just never know what to expect in these particular zones, because somebody could drop that you had no idea would drop in those zones. Like somebody that you thought was going to go 15th because there's some medical yellow flag or red flag that drops and is now suddenly available. Or maybe there's some information that teams didn't like about somebody that allows you to consider somebody that you had no idea could possibly be in your zone. The Nuggets have been mostly steady in terms of the first picks that they've taken. We can talk about that, and we'll talk more about the Nuggets specifically a little bit more in the second segment and the third segment. But for everybody that's in here, and Nuggets fans specifically, I wanted to give everybody at least an impression of what this draft is. And from a larger perspective, there's been a lot of discussion about how strong this draft is, what players are going to look like going forward. I'm curious your perspective. You've been looking at this draft for a while. Who do you think is the best player in this class?
That's a tough question. I've gone back and forth on it for a while. Like you said, I think this draft is pretty comparable to 2013, where I think you'll find some guys that could be, all-stars. I think this draft is the same way. But I think in this draft particularly, you're not going to find guys at the top that are all-star caliber level players. You look at past drafts like a Luka, even like a Trae Young, even like going down to third on the board. But if you look at like a Luka, a Paolo, a Wemby, a Zion, even, right? It's just this class is not even comparable to that when it comes to the top end talent. I do think this draft has a lot of depth, which could be great for playoff teams that are picking down the line. But when it comes to the top of this draft, I do think that there's definitely a talent disparity between past class. And then to answer your question about the best player in the class, for me, I currently have Alex Sarr number 1 on my board. I just think he's not a surefire bet, but I do think he's a good bet to take as far as a player who kind of you can mimic in a way to Evan Mobley. Really switchable defender. I think he's going to be a really good defender on that end of the floor. Switchable, scheme versatile as well. Can play in drop coverage. Can play switch. Can play in a hedge or a blitz as well. I just think defensively, I think that's a guarantee. I was pretty close to a guarantee as you can get as being a really, really solid defensive prospect on that end of the floor. And I think offensively, he's shown flashes of self-creation at times and pick and pops. And he kind of moves like a wing, in a 7'1" body. So he's my number 1 prospect right now. And then in my tier 1, I have him. I have Ron Holland as well, who didn't have a great year with the Ignite. But I do think he has star potential. And has potential to be maybe a multi-year all-star or one-time all-star. And then I have Nikola Topic as well in my tier 1, out of Mega. So those are 3 guys in my top tier right now. And I think, even if you go a little further down the board, like I really like Donovan Clingan. Was fortunate enough to see him in person a couple times this year, being on the East Coast with UConn. I think he's going to be a really good player too. But I would say Sarr is probably the best player in this class, at least from my personal perspective on board.
It's interesting. We haven't talked at all. I haven't talked to you about any of those guys. We're 2 for 3. 2 for 3 on the guys that we think could be at the top. And we're thinking maybe Topic and Holland and guys like that could potentially fall out of the lottery.
Crazy.
Like based off of injury or just different concerns. It's so weird. I don't understand. Like just coming from an outside perspective, like dropping in about because I started focusing on this right after Denver got eliminated in middle of May.
Right.
And I'm looking at all of the conversations surrounding these players, guys like Reed Shepherd and even Devin Carter and like some role players that I like. I think that these guys are very interesting and they could be very helpful for teams. And I'm just looking at, and like I picked those guys just out of a hat. I could pick any of the names. Clingan is a good example, actually. These guys going to go 1? Really? Are we serious? Like, is this really a possibility that this player goes first overall in this draft? And I'm very flummoxed by it because I agree with you that Sarr, he's one of the guys that I think makes the most sense from a talent standpoint, a pop standpoint, somebody who could be an all-star. Right. Topic is another one who I'd guess, if I had to guess who are these guys going to be all-stars in their careers, Topic is one that I would think has that potential because of the way that he can control the game. And then you're going to be surprised by the other name that actually you may not be surprised. Kel'el Ware. Like that's the other one. Like of those 3, those are the 3 that I think have all-star potential in this draft from like a pop standpoint and like a actual ceiling standpoint. And it's not a surprise to me that Ware is suddenly jumping into like lottery consideration because teams are suddenly starting to realize that. But it's so funny, man. Like it does compare to 2013 for that reason, because if you remember, not a lot of all-stars in 2013, especially at the top.
Yep. Definitely. No, for sure. I think it's, it's pretty comparable in that aspect that the top end talent is just not really on par with, past years. Like even like you said, like even Wemby after that, like the talent, the top end talent wasn't, incomparable to like other years as well. But even just looking at 2013, you look at some of the guys in that class, like Oladipo, obviously had a pretty good career. KCP was in that draft as well.
It was going to be part of my trivia. Damn, going to be part of my trivia. I'm interrupting you here. The top 4 guys in minutes played from the 2013 NBA draft were actually, you know what? You tell me because you probably know.
Wow. So KCP, since you gave it to me.
Yeah. Damn.
KCP, McCollum, I'd say is on there as well. CJ,
Yep.
Giannis,
Yep.
and one more. If I were to guess, probably I don't know if Oladipo would meet the threshold though, because he was injured for a couple seasons. Was it Oladipo?
Oladipo was not. I think he was like 10th.
Okay, wow. Steven Adams?
It's a big name. Name that Nuggets fans are probably pretty familiar with.
Oh, Gobert.
Yes, that's right.
Wow.
Giannis at 25K, KCP at 24K, McCollum and Gobert each at 23K. But you're looking at the 13th pick? KCP, I don't remember what pick he was. McCollum was 11. He went 8. Okay.
Yep.
McCollum went to 11 or 10, one of the two, and
Yep.
Gobert went 27. So like none of those guys in the top 7, like the top half of the lottery is what we're talking about here. And like Oladipo would have been had he stayed healthy. I don't think anybody questions that. But that's the thing about drafts like these is everything's going to get so funky. And the Nuggets, they just have to stay in it in order to like take their hit on a guy that could potentially be helpful. I think like just listening to some of the conversation about some of these guys, role players more abundant in this one than 2013. Like there just wasn't talent in 2013 is what the real issue was. And so it's funny, Tim Connolly gets a lot of flack for trading out of that draft and then giving up the Gobert pick. But he was right. If you look after that, he was right. There was no reason to keep it.
I think that was one of his first moves as general manager, right?
It was the first one.
Unreal. Eric Green and Cash.
Joffrey Laverne was another one. Shout out to King Joffrey.
Too. Yep.
Yeah.
The king.
Okay. So other than Alex Sarr, Khalil Ware for me, and Nikola Topic, I also had 3 guards that I think could surprise. And it's funny, all of them are kind of falling to various degrees in this draft. Jared McCain of Duke, whose like elite skill is shooting, clearly.
Yep.
Carlton Carrington, Bub Carrington, who his elite skill is going off the dribble and shooting. And Isaiah Collier, whose elite skill is getting into the paint. All 3 of those guys have elite skills. And that's kind of the clear high watermark for me of guys that can actually succeed at the NBA level and maybe even flash at the NBA level. It's just so crazy that some of those guys are falling. Like Isaiah Collier, did you see him mocked at 26 in one of the most recent mock drafts? That's insane.
Crazy. It's really crazy. Yeah, with Collier in particular, I think for me, we're probably going to talk about him later on in the show. Yeah. I have him top 5 on my board, my personal board right now. I just think that, I know we were speaking the other day, just the context at USC for him with the surrounding talent, it was just, really, really suboptimal, in my opinion. And, he was playing with players who couldn't catch the ball and lack of floor spacing. If you watch, a couple games, I've watched a little bit more Collier recently because I think there might be a chance that he's there for Denver. And obviously from my prior scouting as well, it's just like, just seeing like the opposing team just converge on him and have 3 guys just whenever he has like a rim attempt, try to just converge on him and force him to kick it out and a shooter on USC to just not make the shot. Yeah. So in that aspect, I just think like as far as the context, is concerned, I think that was probably the worst context dependent fit in the class for now. So I think that's kind of unfortunately had an effect on his draft stock. But yeah, and Collier in particular, I just think that he's going to return top 5 value in this class, as being a 6'4" guard. Really great at generating rim pressure. I know the 3-point number didn't look that great, but if you kind of look at the spacing that he had and all the creation that he was able to kind of do, is just he had like a really large offensive burden. So I kind of take that into account. Him playing with better floor spacing and NBA players, I just think it's going to be much different, outlook for him moving forward.
Yeah, and he just also looks like one of those guys that is a little bit overwhelmed by like, hey, I'm the only guy out here. What the hell do I do? How do I how do I actually include everybody else when I'm really the only guy that could do anything? And there's something to that. He will have to adjust, but I don't know if teams clearly have not seen him as a guy that can adjust. Like that's one of the reasons why he's falling, I assume. So it's going to be interesting to see whether he can turn that around. But in a system like Denver, where your job is pretty simple, and for the backup point guard, the job is pretty simple: get the ball into the paint and get the ball to Nikola Jokic.
Right.
Seems like a pretty easy or relatively easy pathway to success. So I don't know. I'm curious, man. It's going to be fascinating to see that. Any other guys at the top of the draft that you think we should discuss that aren't necessarily going to be there? Like, is there a bust that you're like, hey, I don't believe in this guy at all?
Yeah. Contrary to a lot of draft Twitter is very high on him, and I don't know. I just see myself kind of going against the perspective. Reed Shepherd for me. I just have a difficult time, and I know the advanced metrics really favor Reed, and again, I think he had a great year at Kentucky, so I don't want to take anything away from him. I just have a difficult time seeing a 6'2" ish off guard working. I think dependently, like if he goes to the Spurs, then I'll say, okay, I think he'll make it now. Because if you're combined with, Jeremy Sohan and Victor, Wembanyama as your defensive anchors, I think that's going to make up for Reed's deficiencies, right? But I do think Reed will figure it out. But as far as like a top 5 grade for me, I wouldn't say Reed will be a bust, but I just don't think he'll return top 5-ish value in that spot, where I see a lot of people ranking him highly. I see actually some people even have him at 1. And I can't get there. I'm just being like a 6'2" off guard who's not really a point guard and who can't really really generate that much paint pressure. It's kind of a questionable thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, he just strikes me as an elite role player, and
Yep.
maybe that will work. Maybe he's a guy that is a clear, like, sixth man type that comes in as a combo guard and then absolutely kills it in some of those circumstances. But again, when you're being drafted at the top 5, you got to be like you're looking for stars, and I think so
Yep.
many of these guys are going to be pressured into trying to become stars by their fan base, and the circumstances are going to fall short. It is going to happen with so many of these guys that a lot of teams are going to be left wanting and being left disappointed unless they place the proper expectations on it immediately. So like they're going to need the proper context, and he's certainly a guy that I could see that happening with. Like I see why people like him. I just don't believe in him as like, oh yeah, you're going to make him your lead guard. Okay.
Right.
All right.
And that's the bet on him. And that's the bet. That would be the bet on him, right? If he goes number 1, I wouldn't really see like the bet for him would be, play as an off guard and we're going to take you number 1. I think that would be like, we're going to put the ball in your hands and you're going to make reads in a pick and roll all the time. And we're going to see if you can, generate paint pressure and, hit shots at, as a, and pick and roll as a pull up shooter and things like that, which I think he could. I actually buy his 3-point shot. But I just do think at 6'2", it's just going to be tough in the NBA for him to kind of, especially defensively. I just think it's going to be really tough. He's gonna have to guard like the least, offensive threat, on the other team. So I just think in that aspect, I don't know if he'll be a bust, but I don't think he's going to return top 5 value in the class. That's kind of my hot take for the top of this class.
Well, given that everything is flat and that everybody's trying to figure out who are we going to draft in the top 5, I can understand that. Like I can understand you making that bet and that probably panning out. So look, we'll see what happens with it, but tell you what, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to pivot to the Nuggets. We're going to talk about 20th overall pick, 56th overall pick, and some names that Nuggets fans need to be watching out for. We will be right back. But first, I got to tell everybody about number 38, the best place in Rhino for you to go hang out with your friends, go get some brunch food, go get some beers, go hang out on their patio. It's a lot of fun. This is one of the best spots in all of Denver, with a little outdoor stage, an indoor area where it's massive. You're going to have as much space as you need, and you can hang out, watch some games, or just hang out with some friends. It's a lot of fun. Make sure to go check them out. Number 38 up in Rhino, and let them know that you came from Mile High Sports. We'll be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. And we're back. Pickaxe and Roll, Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show, joined by my guy CTFazio on the other side, talking the NBA draft. And now we're going to discuss the Nuggets a little bit. If you're here live, thank you so much for being here live. Drop some Nuggets questions in the chat, and we will try to answer them as much as we can. Also, hit that like button and that subscribe button while you're here. First, CT, let's get into 28th overall pick, 56th overall pick. How strongly do you feel about Denver keeping those picks versus trading those picks for a veteran or two, based off of where their roster is right now?
Yeah, no, so I think it's an interesting question, right? I know you've been on your show going back and forth with that, with that discussion as well, and I've been tuning into Lockdown, the DNVR guys too. They've been talking about it as well. I think it's an interesting conversation. I just don't know how far the 28th pick could get you. Um, in this class specifically, if you're going to trade up into the draft, like I don't think if you're attaching the first to Zeke Naji and others, right? I don't know how much further up the board you could get, if at all. I don't know if you're going to get any further up the board, maybe to 26 or so, possibly if you trade 28 and other kind of players, maybe. I think obviously the trade piece that a lot of people have brought up is MPJ, and I'm just not there to trade him yet this offseason. I think he probably deserves another go around to bring back. But yeah, no, I personally think that if the Nuggets going to stick to their plan, right, as far as the project, dynasty talk with, bringing in draft picks, I think they should personally keep the pick. But I did pose the question the other day on Twitter. I said, how many young players can the Nuggets realistically add to the mix since they have 5 guys already on cost control deals, in Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, Strawther, Pickett, and Tyson, right? And I think it's an interesting question, and I wouldn't be surprised if they traded the pick, just to kind of measure out the roster and have like a little bit more of a balance. But also, too, I think if the Nuggets are serious about continuing this draft and develop plan with their starting lineup, which I'm all for keeping the core 4 together for as long as possible, until proven otherwise. I think this year was just an outlier, as far as them losing. A lot of stuff went wrong, for the Nuggets. With Murray's injury, and they come off with a championship last year, and just they're kind of gassed at the end of it, and Gobert was hitting fadeaway shots at the end. So I just think for me, it's like I'd rather give this team another chance. I think they deserve it, especially after winning the championship. So I think I would keep the pick because I don't really think the first rounder is going to net much, especially in a class
Right.
that's been tabbed as not being a great class. So I think there's more value in keeping the pick and adding another guy to the mix. And again, I think maybe a consolidation trade with a Pickett or a Tyson, which I'm sure we'll get to in a second, is something that I would look forward to. To see if they can kind of work out.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and I think it's going to be a battle between not just Malone and Booth, but just like making sure that as many players as possible are contributing in a consistent way.
Yep.
It's something that I think going forward with the second apron being such a big deal, so many of these rosters, and you just look at the rosters that were actually successful this year, they had 10, 11, 12 guys that they could realistically go to in the regular season and then pare it down in the playoffs, obviously, but it allowed their starters to stay fresh. Dallas and Boston certainly come to mind there, as does Indiana. Indiana made it to the Eastern Conference Finals in particular because they had so many guys that they could go to. So I'm thinking that Denver adding a guy certainly makes sense. I wonder if with that 56th overall pick, or if they move around, shift around something a little bit. I think that guy being on a 2-way contract makes more sense this time around.
Agreed.
I don't necessarily want to fill too many full-time roster spots with guys that you don't expect to play.
Yeah,
that's just like it's tough. It's really, really tough to see that happening. So we'll see what they ultimately end up doing. But now, should the Nuggets draft for need versus drafting best player available? This is the age-old question where you get this as a draft analyst a lot, I'm sure. I have to imagine that right now with where the Nuggets are, drafting for need is okay. And how I define need personally is fills a clearly defined role within Denver's current and future plans. You don't necessarily think that they're going to be a star, but you think that they can fill a plan. And rather than just taking the guy that was projected to go 15th overall and is instead in your lap at 28th, maybe that's not the best course of action for the entire, like for one reason or another. It depends on the guy, obviously, and if they fit in, great. But if that person doesn't fit with you, What do you think? What do you think Denver should do in that situation?
Yeah, no, another interesting question. I think for if you go back to the Christian Brown draft, right? When we were talking about that class, we wanted to draft for need, as well because the Nuggets just had no wing defenders at that
Yeah,
point. So
100%.
I think CB also was a best player available on the board. I do think that he was part of that mix and discussion as well. I think last year, Booth kind of said in his presser that he was looking for more shooting off the bench, which was valid concern. And I think, Strawder, if you look at his kind of first season, was up and down. The percentages obviously weren't great, but, he had an injury too. We have to factor in. So I think I would give an incomplete grade for his year last year. But I think for this year, I would go for need. The Nuggets have two clearly defined needs, I think. And I do think if we're talking about the rotation, right, I preferably would like to put the rotation as the backup guard and center as veterans guys. I'm sure we'll speak a little bit more about that later. Like adding like a Chris Dunn, and then as a center in the backup would be like a Goga Batadze, right? Somebody like that.
Sure.
I think they do need two more veteran guys to go along with the bench because I think relying on solely young guys is a difficult ask of a championship roster. But yeah, no, I think going for fit at 28 is something that I would look to go to as far as a backup point guard and a backup center. Those are the two
Yeah.
guys, especially in my kind of scouting and analysis for the Nuggets, would be two clearly defined roles and needs that the Nuggets need moving forward, especially looking at a point guard, right? You look at Murray this year, he was the only ball handler really that could, scale up because he couldn't play with Reggie due to defensive concerns, right? And if you look in the back in the center spot, Jokic was the sole big, and he had to play Gordon at backup center, even a lot more during the regular season as well, due to the fact that DeAndre obviously is getting older and then Zeke was simply unplayable. But I think the two needs of concern for Denver are guard, backup point guard, and a center.
Undoubtedly so. I have them marked down here, backup center, and then I wrote versatile point guard. Not
Yep.
necessarily somebody who is one or the other between a point guard and a combo guard, but you want somebody that can do some things of both traits because they're going to play with Jamal Murray at times and without Jamal Murray at times, with Nikola Jokic at times, without Nikola Jokic at times. So you want
Right.
somebody who can handle a variety of different situations and then run a pick and roll by themselves with a normal rim runner if you can. So it'll be interesting to see them flesh that out. I wanted to start with more centers in this segment, and then we can go to more guards and wings in segment 3. DaRon Holmes was the one who I brought you on really to talk about specifically.
Mm-hmm.
We've both heard different things about DaRon Holmes and what he's like what his draft range is. It looks like he's rising. He just got a green room invite. There's been a rumor that he's been promised by the Nuggets, and I don't think that that's necessarily off base. I think that he is the perfect fit for Denver at that spot. I really do. I think that of the players that you can get at the 28th overall pick, he's not going to be an all-star, but he's going to be solid. And you just need somebody that's solid that can do a bunch of different things. And to me, he could do a variety of different things and like doesn't look like he's going to be scared out there. So what do you, resident DaRon Holmes stan, think of DaRon Holmes?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think DaRon Holmes is the ideal player in this draft for the Nuggets. Obviously, a little bit of an older prospect with Booth, which Booth has targeted in past classes, other than Watson. I just think Holmes, his versatility stands out, and something that I think he could play with Jokic and he could play without Jokic. And I think if you look at the backup bigs in the past, right, DeAndre can't play with Jokic. Zeke now at this point, maybe 2 or 3 years ago we saw it, but now he can't play with Jokic because he can't space the floor.
It's funny, man. Like he was supposed to be able to. That was
Right.
the entire reason why Calvin Booth signed him to that extension. It's because he thought, okay, I can get a guy that could play next to and behind Nikola Jokic, and it just did not work.
Yep.
There have been some comparisons of Holmes to Zeke Naji. So just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's way off base, I think, in my opinion. Zeke wasn't a shooter in college. Holmes this year, he shot 39% on 3 threes a game. He's a guy who's an inside-outside threat. He's actually a really good ball handler as well. Dayton
Right.
ran. Anthony Grant was a former, assistant for the Thunder. He coached at Alabama as well, and then he's now coaching at Dayton. And he's a guy who runs a really great, NBA kind of style offense. And DaRon actually, aside from running pick and rolls as the roller, he would run pick and rolls as the ball handler as well. And Dayton had a lot of shooters too, so DaRon would, he'd be running, initiating pick and rolls, hitting cutters, hitting guys, popping out for three as well. So I think with Holmes is that you could, arguably run a pick and roll with Holmes and Jokic. I think that'd be something that you can run, but also too at the bench, Holmes could run a pick and roll with a Strawler. He can run a pick and roll with a CB, right? I think that's something that the Nuggets just haven't had since DeMarcus Cousins. Is they haven't had an offensively potent big since Cousins. And I think with Holmes, 20 points a game, All American this year, eight rebounds, 3 assists, a night, and he's a really good passer too. Out of short rolls, he could pass,
Right.
quick decision maker, and that's what you need now in the NBA. You need, as your bigs, you need quick decision makers. You need guys that can put pressure on the rim offensively. And the Nuggets, I'm curious to hear what you think about it as well. Like the Nuggets just lacked versatility this year off the bench. They lacked problem solvers. I kind of wrote in my postseason article as well. Like the Nuggets just lacked, threats off the bench. There was a lot of redundancy with the skill sets there. And I think, with Blacko going out too, I think he would have helped too. We'll see for next year. But I think with Holmes is that he's an inside-outside big, really scheme versatile defensively as well. He could switch on different players.
Right.
Really good in drop coverage, as a shot blocker and a rim protector. Could play in a blitz, could play in a hedge. I just think the Nuggets, like I said, just lack scheme versatility. And I think Holmes, his ability to play with Jokic, play with the bench himself as a sole big, and put pressure on teams offensively while being a pretty good defender, I think it'd be a perfect fit for Denver going into next year.
I like the idea of a player being able to work at all 3 levels. One of them being, hey, we're going to pick and pop you. We're going to make sure to space the floor and go 5 out. Well, he can fill that mold. If you want to use him in the short roll where he's not getting all the way to the rim, but then he's making decisions and splashing it out to other 3-point guys, or maybe dumping it down into the short corner, the dunker spot. Yeah, that's a great thing for him to do as well. He'll be capable of doing that. And then if you also just want to run like all the way to the rim and have him go above the rim, he's athletic enough to do that too. So I see this as a very, very important piece that Denver could add to their team. And I'm fully on board with you, man. I think that if he's there, they should try to get him. I don't know if he's going to be there. If he was available at 24, 23, and then you get a little bit antsy that somebody's going to snag him right in front of you, I think he's also worth an option to trade up. I'm not sure what Denver has in order to trade up, and that would make sense for a lot of teams. But if it's a couple second-round picks, do it.
Yep, I agree. No, for me, too, like I would definitely trade 28 and say a Pickett or a Tyson if possible to move up. For me personally, I'm just not. I know we kind of spoke last year as well. Personally, I just was lower on Tyson and Pickett on my board.
Sure.
I just don't. Just to be transparent, I don't think those guys are going to help Denver in a playoff setting. I just think Pickett for me is a guy who's a really one-dimensional point guard as far as like playing without Jokic is kind of his sell. And I think that's like a false direction there because Jokic's going to be on the floor in the playoffs for like 40 plus minutes a night. Right. So it's like you're really a specific need. And I think Pickett could be a good player. Don't get me wrong. I just think for Denver, I think they need more scheme versatile guys. And, Tyson as well, I don't want to write these guys off after 1 year. I think that'd be an unfair, kind of assessment. But, the Nuggets are in a window now where they have to get everything. They have to get, decisions right. And if they have to trade one of those guys to move up for Holmes, I think I would do it.
I will agree and also say it's I still it's funny. One of my most popular podcast episodes ever was, is Hunter Tyson the greatest Nugget of all time? From after the way that he played at Summer League. We'll see whether he actually can translate it to an NBA context, but I just want to see those guys before necessarily making those decisions. But if that's the price of business, then sometimes you have to do it. So look, this is why Calvin Booth has a really tough job. And I will never criticize him overly much because One, they won a championship, and two, this is all really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Other bigs, and we'll go kind of rapid fire here through some of these other guys. Kyle Filipowski of Duke. Do you believe in him?
I do. I do believe in Kyle Filipowski. He was actually on my list here from what I had in my notes. Flip for me, I think is he would be a really good option. I think as Denver's backup center, because I think you can kind of mirror what Jokic, obviously not what Jokic does, but you could run similar stuff as far as being a post hub, right? And it's kind of like I think a lot of the Nuggets' problems is that playing without Jokic is like a difficult ask because playing with him is a really like has taken years to kind of figure out like how to reach peak levels, right?
Right.
And I think now with Flip is that you can use him as a post hub. He's a really, really good passer for a big. Like in short rolls, like he makes really quick decisions. Like him and McCain in the pick and roll this year was a really dynamic duo. And McCain was hitting him on short rolls, and he was firing out to, to different shooters. Like Tyrese Proctor was another guy who was pretty good for Duke as well. But I think Flip is a guy you could use in the post. He's got great footwork, and he's physical too. Like I know a lot of people were kind of down on him after the tournament run, but I really like the way that he's, he throws, throws his body around the post. He's got multiple fakes and footwork that he could use. And he's a stretch big as well. Flip shot, I think 34% from 35% from three this year. So pretty good on, I think 3 attempts a game.
Which will fluctuate throughout his career. That's with all these guys. I don't necessarily look at the number as much as I look at the willingness and the free throw percentage and things like that. Like, and he seems willing.
Definitely, for sure. And I think the Nuggets off their bench, like as for a big is concerned, like they either need like a rim roller, like a really like good rim roller to roll to the rim and put pressure that way, or they need to play 5 out, in my opinion, where you can stretch the defense, right? If you want to play them with Brown and Watson, you can't have a guy who's like a non-shooter. I think Flip is a guy he attacks closeouts, from 3. A really good matchup was him against Missy this year for Baylor. That was a great matchup. And he kind of was able to attack him with closeouts and get to the rim there as well. So I think with Flip is that the defense is definitely a concern, but I think you could play him like Jokic does, play him at the level of the screen. He's not going to be an overly great rim protector, but if you play him at the level of the screen, you have guys like Watson and Brown to be your backup help.
I made this point. I made this point with the point guard conversation that's why you have Brown and Watson. That's why you have these guys who are these unbelievable defenders that you have off your bench. You made a commitment to getting them. Get a bad defensive center, but somebody that lifts your offense up, and then let the defensive wings do the work. Like it's not a problem, especially in the regular season. Now, could it be a problem in the playoffs? Sure, but then you've got to work with Jokic in the playoffs. So it's the same conversation. So it's funny, man. I think that he would be great. I think that there's a variety of other guys that would be pretty solid too. Are you a Zach Edey fan?
I have Edey top 20 on my board. I think I have him at 17 right now. So I'd say I'm not like overly high on him. I know a couple of draft Twitter people have him like pretty high up. But I think Edey's going to work in the NBA. I do. And especially in this class with the depth that's at the top, like I'm willing to take that bet. And I think Edey for sure, like has some limitations. If you watch, I don't know if you watched the national championship, but like Newton was just carving him up in pick and roll over and over again, which I'm sure we'll talk about him in a second. But I do think like a pick and roll, like him guarding a pick and pop big is going to be a problem. Him guarding and pick and roll as a lob threat might be a problem as well. But I just think Edey, he really improved his offensive game this year. Is like you could dump it down to him in the post and he can like attack mismatches where it's not like a Gobert situation where it's like you throw him the ball and it's not, you can kind of put like a guard on him and it won't really be that much of an issue, right? I think with Edey, like he can punish mismatches defensively too. I think he's going to be really good, especially if you can play him in a drop, in certain matchups. But I think with him, he's just a guy I'm willing to take that bet on. I think his passing too is pretty decent for a big as well. So I think like in the top, like even the lottery, like I have a board coming out tomorrow. Like it's not finalized yet, but I wouldn't be like shocked if I put him like 14, like 15 around there. I think that's like reasonable, like a reasonable bet to take with him.
Especially in this class, like you want somebody that can command some sort of respect down there, and he would absolutely do that. Whether he's mobile enough to do it, we'll see. But I mean, I was looking at some of the actual athletic testing numbers. he's not that much slower or even slower at all than some of these other guys. Like he can still move reasonably
Yep.
well. So I'm curious to see how it translates. And maybe he just looks like he's moving slow because he's got that face where it just looks like he's working really. It's kind of like the Joker face where like he just looks like he's working really hard. Um, and then he also is just 7'4", so everything he does looks like it's in slow motion. It kind
Yep.
of is. It reminds me of the Michael Porter defense conversation where everything he does looks like it's in slow motion, but then you realize, oh, he covered a lot of ground there. So,
Yep.
um, yeah, will be interesting to see it. Eve Misi, Kalel Ware, likely off the board. I'm not necessarily worried as much about them, but I do think that they're pretty good. As I mentioned with Ware specifically, having somebody that can pick and pop like that and also is athletic enough to do what he does, that's a pretty strong skill set. Oso Igudaro. Actually, you pronounce that name. Oso Igudaro.
Iguodaro.
That's
Yep.
sound pretty good. Okay.
You got it. You got it.
How is he? Because I'm looking at him. I saw some Brandon Clark comparisons and got pretty excited about that. Is he athletic enough to play that Brandon Clark kind of role? Because I've always thought that Clark would be a pretty interesting match with Jokic.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think that comp is pretty good. I think with Clark is he's more athletic than Oso, as far as guarding like perimeter forwards. And Clark too, like he had really great touch in college.
Sure.
I was like really high on Clark back in that draft. With Oso, I watch him a lot because I watch a lot of the Big East. And with Oso is for me, I'm probably a little bit lower on him, I think, than the consensus. I have him a second round grade on him. So I wouldn't take him in the first with their pick at 28. I think he's a bit undersized to play the big, to play center. I think
Sure.
he's like 6'10" or so. So he's a little bit on the smaller side there for a big. I do like his touch, but I do worry that like him in the short roll is going to be a bit of an issue, like putting pressure on the paint scoring. But he's a really good passer, though. Really good passer out of the short roll, quick decision maker. Like I wouldn't be surprised if he carves out a role as a backup big. I just think for Denver, like in the first round, I would maybe in the second round, like a 56 if he gets there, maybe it could be an option. But I do have concerns about his height and his ability offensively because he can't shoot either from three. So he's kind of like limited to more of like in the paint. So I'm just kind of concerned with how he matches up against like bigger centers,
Sure.
as well as kind of like his offensive arsenal too.
To be fair, Denver's got Jokic for some of those bigger centers, so I'm not necessarily as concerned in those circumstances. Like,
Mhm.
there's only one Andre Drummond in the league, and it's Andre Drummond for some of these backup guys. So I'm not necessarily as worried about how big they're going to be from a backup perspective. But I think he's interesting, and I think he's smart, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to include him here. Like
Yep.
playing with Tyler Kolek with Marquette, but that definitely helps. And I think that there's some similarities between those two guys in terms of maybe a little bit undersized, but might be pretty helpful for a team. So we'll see what happens. Tell you what, let's take another break. I think we're at that time. When we come back, we're going to go over some guards, some combo guards, and maybe even some wings if we can get to them. We've got plenty to cover still here on Pickaxe and Roll. We will be right back. All right, we're back. Final segment, Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for showing up, folks. Really appreciate it. Let me go back over some of these comments to see if there were any questions. I should have probably just highlighted them going forward. All right. Hurricane says, where are we at with Da Silva? I didn't include him. And this is, is it Oscar Da Silva? Or what is his first name again? Tristan. Why did I think Oscar Da Silva? Is Oscar a boxer or a fighter or something? That sounds right to me. I you know what? That's just going to be in my head forever. Tristan Da Silva. Like seemed like he was going to go in the lottery, so I didn't really consider him that much.
Yeah, no, he got a green room invite today. He played at Colorado as well, so right down the road from you guys out there. Yeah, Da Silva's interesting. Dribble, pass, shoot, wing. Just I think a 3-and-D wing. Can really shoot the ball. I think he's pretty tall, like 6'9". So he's got height, he's got the length. I just think he'll be like a 3-and-D wing. He's got some handle upside too, where he can handle the ball. make some plays at a pick and roll. So I just think for me, I probably have him around like the top 20-ish. Not really like overly like lottery level, but I do think he'll carve out a role as a 3 and D wing in the league. And as you know, that's a skill set that you need. For every team can use a 3 and D wing, and I think De Silva will carve out a role like that.
Especially at that size, like it makes you so valuable when you can be in that situation where like it's a 6'8", 6'9" dude. Like Jeremy Grant is making so much money because of his ability to do exactly that. So it's pretty interesting to see. Hurricane says Oscar is also a Nuggets media member. He's one of the co-hosts of Locked On. We're doing Locked On Mile High. We did that yesterday. That was a fun show with my guy Swipe. So make sure to go check it out. Let's go over some guards. Let's talk about various guards here. We mentioned actually we'll have to go pretty quickly because there's so many guys that I want to get into.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to just list them, and I want you to pick and choose the ones that you want to talk about that you think could make a good fit for Denver. Isaiah Collier, Bub Carrington, Tyler Kolek, KJ Simpson, AJ Mitchell, Tristan Newton, and Jamal Sheed from Houston. 7 guys that I had listed, and I could have gone with more. But where are you at with this guard class? Which of those guys stand out most to you?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a really big glut of guards in this class that I know we spoke about Pickett before. Guards that I would think are better than Pickett, I would take in this class, and I think would sign to a standard roster spot.
Sure.
Just to be honest there, but I think Collier, would be the guy that stands out most. Unfortunately, it seems like he's kind of sliding down the board as of late. Like you said before, mocked at 26, which is a pretty big slide because he was ranked at number 1 at one point. Going back
number
like
1 overall pick in the class, like he was the top recruit.
This has Tyrese Maxey slippage potential here. I know that class was a brutal class because Maxey went right before Denver's pick, and the rest is history there. But I think with Collier, I think like we said before, we talked about him a little bit. Just the context of USC was just really bad. I think as a guard, especially for the Nuggets off the bench, I'm curious to see what you think. Like him playing next to Murray is like a guard who can catch and go, and attack the rim and put pressure on the paint. Kick out to MPJ and say KCP if he's still here for 3. I think that'd be a really dynamic fit. And Collier is a bit on the smaller side. He's like 6'4", 6'3" from what I've seen.
Right.
So he's a little bit smaller there, but I do think he could play with Murray because I think defensively he could hold up because he's physical, and he's quick. So I think in that way with Murray, that's like 2 prerequisites that you need in order to survive with Murray, right? Defensively. And I think Murray, his defense obviously was not good in the playoffs, but I think he's a better defender than what we saw. Sure. But I do think with Collier, I think you can put him on the opposing guard, the better guard on the other team, and he can kind of, I wouldn't say lock him down, but he could kind of put up a fight, as being as physical and being quick. Got quick hands defensively too.
He's built like a brick house, man. Like that dude, he's strong. He moves people out of the way when he drives to the rim. He can go through a larger body and make them go backwards in order to create space for himself, which is really cool. I like him. I think he, like I said at the beginning, he's one of those guys that has an elite skill, and that's getting into the paint, putting 2 feet into the paint. And then his big problem is making decisions and making sure that he's making the right decision for the right time. Turns the ball over a little bit too much, doesn't necessarily get teammates involved as much as he can, but some of that, as you said, is context dependent. Some of it probably his own doing that he'll need to work his way out of. But like you said, I think he could play with Murray. Murray's more of an off guard in that situation, but I like the idea of them kind of passing the ball back and forth. Murray starts an action on one side, Collier catches the ball, drives the lane, kicks out to an MPJ in the weak side corner. Like I could see that sequence in my head. There's a lot that they could do with that. You get guys with elite talent, and he's got elite physical traits. So that would be a name that I think people should watch out for falling. Now, whoever actually decides to take the fall on that, we will see. But I'm very curious. What other names?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think to add on to the Collier discussion, I think if he's there at 28 and Holmes is gone, I think I would take him.
Sure.
If he's there. I think him, especially with a bench with a roller, would be really good. He made some really like great passes here at a pick and roll. That was like really impressive. Skip passes and lobs. Even though the context wasn't good, I just think that he's going to have a really good skill set. I think he'd be great off Denver's bench. I think you can kind of plug and play him right away. The next guard that I'm going to go with, you guessed it, Tristan Newton from UConn.
What?
Um, I think Newton is severely underrated in the class. I know a lot of draft Twitter, guys that I speak with have first round grade on Tristan Newton. He's one of the more like decorated players over the past 2 years at UConn. He's in the Huskies Ring of Honor there over the past 2 years. Like that's how much of an impact he's made over there. Just to read out some of his accolades over the past year: Bob Cousy Award, All American, first team All American, first team All Big East, Final Four Most Outstanding Player, and 2-time national champion. So that's
good?
all of his accolades. Seems pretty good to me. And then also I have a trivia here I wanted to ask you about. So Newton has 4 triple doubles in his career. So the most as a major conference player since Shaq.
Really?
So yes. And he is tied right now, in college basketball history with triple doubles with 4. There's 3 other names that he's tied with. 2 I'll give you. 1 I'll ask if you can get it. David Robinson and Jason Kidd are the 2 other names. There's one other player who's another guard who was drafted over the past couple of years, All-Star in the West. Could you name who it is?
Past couple of years, All-Star in the West, guard. Oh man, it's All-Star in the West. It's just so like, because I think of names like Lillard and Russell Westbrook and those OG names that have been
sooner than that.
Oh, just kidding.
No, way sooner.
Way
I'd
sooner.
say like less than 5 years ago.
Give me the draft year.
The same year as Zion.
Okay, John Morant.
Huh. John Morant had 4 triple doubles, in his college career.
I forgot that he was that quality of a rebounder. That's because he's a stick figure. That's interesting. Huh.
Yep.
All right.
So just some stats I wanted to name about Newton, just like that his career has been really, decorated, over the past 2 years with UConn. Newton's a guy like I'm really high on. I just think winning 2 national championships, being the starting point guard, I think that matters. Being a winning player. And he's a guy, like I said, 4 triple doubles over his career. Like he's a multifaceted guard. He's a good scorer, can really rebound, and he's a really good passer as well.
Why do you think he's fallen then? Like what is the disconnect between what some of draft Twitter is saying?
I think the age, he's already 23. And I think the 3-point shot as well. He's only shot like 32% this year. Last year he shot 37% on a decent amount of volume. I think this year he shot 33% on 6 attempts a game, nearly. So pretty like decent volume there. I just think too, like having such a high powered offense that he was like the engine of. Yeah, I think that matters. I think him playing with Klingon. He made it made life easier for Klingon as a lob threat. And some of the spacing there was pretty good. He played with Caravan, who's a good 3-point shooter. Cam Spencer as well. Savon Castle obviously was not really that great of a floor spacer, but I just think with Newton as a guy who could with Castle too. Like we'll probably talk about him in a little bit. He's a guy like if the Nuggets were going to trade like far, I would look for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, with Newton, I just think like he's a clutch shot maker, 2-time national champ, ability to draw the defense into the paint. And he's a shot creator too. Like with the Nuggets, I think him and Murray could play together, but also too, he could play off the bench with a lob threat. So
I love some of the lobs that he throws. That's one of the things that stood out. Just going back watching some of his highlights through the tournament run, like he can throw lobs and put it into a spot that only his guy can go get it. And you don't really expect it to actually work, but it does work. It's pretty interesting. No, I like him. I think that he's like, if he's a guy that you can get at 56 because teams are dumb, then sure, like do that. Definitely. That would be great. I have to imagine that some team is going to be like, hey, are we being dumb here and draft him? So I don't think he's going to fall to 56, but you never know. That would be like, look, he'd be an ideal player. Like I talked about at the beginning, I don't know if you necessarily give him the full contract immediately, but 2-way deal. Well, see, that's tough because then you want to be able to commit to a guy like that, but you already just gave a full-time contract to Jalen Pickett. these conversations get very, very difficult. Like if you're
Yep.
Calvin Booth, are you going to draft somebody and then give them a full-time contract and take some time away from the other guard prospect that you're trying to nurture? That's a tough call.
No, it definitely is a tough call, and I know he worked out for Denver too, Newton. That was, public. He was, like, posting all of his workouts, which is pretty funny.
Love
Um,
it. Make
yeah,
it easy for everybody, man.
yep, for sure. I just think with Newton, I have a top 30 grade on him. But with him, I just think, like I said, winning the 2 national championships, I just think that matters. Like, he's a winner. I think Booth would, like, go for a player like that. I think that's kind of like to up his wheelhouse, like to go for Tristan Newton.
He's
Same
old as
with Brown.
hell. Like, and he's smart. Like, that should be right in the wheelhouse.
Yeah,
Come on now.
definitely for sure. Um, yeah, so,
Um,
like, I would give Newton a roster spot. I mean, however that would work, I would give him the roster spot. I think he could play off the bench immediately, and contribute. But, like I said, I think I would rather have a veteran point guard ahead of him to play the rotation minutes. But as a third string, I think you could do far worse than what Newton brings to the table.
oh, I have no doubt. If he's like, he's already a very strong defensive player. He can get into the paint, do a lot of the things I was talking about with Collier. Like, you give somebody like that the reins, and I think there's no doubt that he could be a better player than Collier. Like, he could absolutely be that.
Mhm.
Be a better player than a lot of the point guards that are being drafted ahead of him. Whether he is, we'll see. Other names, Bub Carrington of Pittsburgh, probably not going to fall to Denver. It seems like he got a green room invite, so not
Yep.
necessarily expecting him to actually be there. Tyler Kolek of Marquette, somebody who I think has a lot of fans, although I'm a little bit more tepid on him.
Me too.
He's very small. That's one of the things that really stands out with him. But he is crafty. Like, there's nothing like there's a TJ McConnell in there somewhere for sure. But he's a very crafty player. He's a name to watch out for if you're a Nuggets fan. What about AJ Mitchell? Tell me more about AJ Mitchell of UC Santa Barbara, because he's one guy that I look at and I'm like, yeah, if he's anything like Andrew Nemhard, who's his primary NBA comparison, then please give me AJ Mitchell on the Nuggets, because I think that
Yep.
he's a great fit.
Yep. No, for sure, definitely. I think with the point guards in this class, like with Collier and Newton, like what we were talking about with Mitchell as well, I think what I'm looking for, and I think it makes sense, is that they could play with Murray, but also too they could run the bench themselves, right? I think like Newton could play with Murray as an off guard, like Newton played with Cam Spencer and Castle,
Yep.
2 other guards. He was able to effectively play off the ball, right? So if Murray's on the ball, you can have him stationed off the ball and hit, catch, and shoot threes, and you could run Murray off of actions as well. And I think with Mitchell, I think you can play him with Murray too. Um, he played on a pretty bad team this year, UCSB, in the Big West. But you look at him from a physical perspective, right? 6'5", bigger guard, lefty. 20 points a game, 39% from 3 on 3 attempts a game. I think he's gonna have to up the volume from 3 for teams to really kind of like respect the 3 ball.
Sure.
4 rebounds a game, 4 assists. Really crafty, finding different driving lanes. Like, that's something that really stuck out to me watching the tape of him, is that he finds lanes that other guards in this class don't find. He's able to maneuver in and out of the paint. Hit the lob threat, but also score in the mid range too. I think a little bit, some of his problems is that he's a little bit lefty dominant, doesn't use the right hand a lot. Could be a little bit slow footed, but I like in some games that I watched this year, he really got after it on defense. Like, he would take the opposing team's best player and he'd take that challenge of guarding them. So I just think like him finding really good rim pressure, like manipulating the defense, is something he's really good at too. And him combine that with the scoring, and I think he's got some upside defensively, I think makes for a really good prospect. I think I have him around like the top 40 for now, maybe a little
Yeah.
higher than that. But I
A
wouldn't
lot of
be
people,
surprised if he goes
yeah,
to 28.
a lot of people seem to think that he could be around in the 50s. If he's around in the 50s and Denver could take him there, great. I
Definitely.
think based off of what I've seen, and it hasn't been a lot, like I said at the beginning, fake it till you make it. I think that he would be a very interesting fit for Denver. So if they
Yep.
trust his ability to continue to improve, they trust his ability to continue to fill in the gaps in a variety of different ways while also getting into the lane. That's a really, really important skill. That, like you said, if the context of him being able to find lanes that other guards in this class just can't really find, that's a skill for Denver's bench, because they're not going to have a lot of spacing. So like that's just how it's going to be with Christian Brown and Peyton Watson and a center out there. That's no matter what, it's going to be like that. So I'm very curious to see what happens with him. I would draft him at 28, especially if Holmes and Collier and guys like that are not available. That would be like he'd be an interesting name for sure. Let's go to some wings real quick because we're running out of time. Nikola Jurisic, who's playing at Mega. Interesting name. Reminds me of Bogdan a little bit, Bogdan Bogdanovic, just from the way that he kind of looks and watches on defense and then also kills people on offense. And some of those playoff games were very impressive. Went back and watched some of those. He would be an interesting one, a Serbian, not necessarily thinking that he's the best fit, but if he is the offensive version of Christian Brown and Peyton Watson and can kind of handle some of the playmaking, is he too far behind in his development to make an impact right now, or what do you think?
I think he's a little bit far away. But what I like about Jurisic is that he plays mean. Like he plays like very mean. Like he's got that edge to him from what I've watched. Is that in the combine, like, he was one of the really standout players on the scrimmages. He's a really good passer for a wing. Like some of the passes I've seen him throw are really, really high level. Good shooter as well. I think what you said about the Bogdan comp is kind of spot on. I think if he could fill that role in the league, he's going to be around for a long time. But I think he's a pretty good defender for his size. I think he's had some lapses for the most part, but I do think like when he tries, he's really good. But I buy the jump shot and I buy his ability to handle and play make for a 6'7" wing. I think that's something that's like a skill set that's pretty coveted, in this class. So at 28, would I maybe consider it? I think it's a possibility. I do think that the Nuggets are more need based, but I wouldn't hate that pick if the Nuggets picked him.
Right. And some of these things that I'm really going into with the wings, I talked about this a little bit in my articles for shooting guard, small forward, is that yes, Strother's there. Yes, Peyton Watson's there. Yes, Christian Brown is there. But you don't know if KCP is going to leave. You don't know what the future is going to look like for MPJ, regardless of like how you feel about him. And if Denver has to sort of break up what that group is, you're going to need some offense from that group. And whether Strother can do that, whether Brown can do that, whether Watson can do that, I'm not really sure. And I also think that it's like if one of those guys were to get traded and packaged in a deal that ultimately got Denver their next version of like their third or fourth best player, that would really be a big deal to kind of fill in behind them. So you always have to do the due diligence on this stuff because you never know where the offseason is going to take you. Terrence Shannon just found not guilty in his court case that had been going on for about 9 months. He's a guy that you've long had your eye on, Texas Tech, Illinois. What can you tell us about Terrence Shannon?
Yeah, no, I really I've liked Terrence Shannon's game for a while now, even dating back to Texas Tech. At Illinois too, I think he really took a leap as a guy with the ball in his hands. He could really get downhill, especially like he's like lightning quick in the open floor. Could go end to end like really, really quick. Really good shooter this year. He improved his shooting there. And he took the challenge defensively as guarding the best opposing players. I think as a two-way player, I have Shannon actually really high on my board. I have him at 15. It's like right outside the lottery. I have him really high up. I just think he's going to make an impact as a two-way player. And he is lefty dominant, which could be an issue because he doesn't really use the right hand as much. But this past year, like he's really taken a leap as a creator, as someone who you can put the ball in his hands and say, go get a bucket, instead of just playing off the ball. So honestly, like I wouldn't be opposed to Shannon if that was the pick. But I think there would be some overlap as far as some of the wings that the Nuggets currently have. But like you said, at this point that might not be an option. But I do think Shannon has more like creation upside than what Brown and Watson and Strawler. Maybe Strawler has more, but I do think like you could play him beside Murray and he could kind of like allow him to play off the ball a little bit.
Sure. And like you could never have too many good young wings. Like that's just one
Right.
thing that you're never gonna run out of that because you can play those guys 2, 3, 4. There's plenty of spots for those guys going forward in their rotation. It's just going to be about being patient with them. So I could see it working. And two-way player that you could trust going to the rim sounds great to me. He also drew a bunch of fouls from what I remember. So like he's
Yep.
going to be a guy that gets to the rim and really makes an impact as a free throw shooter as well.
Yep.
Uh, Baylor Shireman, Jalen Tyson, Kevin McCullar. Who would you rank as the best of those three?
That's a tough question. I think for me, I'd go McCullar. And I know that hasn't been the consensus over the past, couple of like big boards I've seen or mock drafts. A lot of like Shireman's a guy in the first round it seems like his stock's been rising.
Yeah.
Tyson, his stock seems to be falling a little bit. Um, I've liked McCullar's game for a while too, and actually, funny enough, he was teammates with Terrence Shannon at Texas Tech.
I was noticing that between him and one other person, like it was McCullar, it was Shannon, it was like these guys all overlapping together.
Yeah, actually, funny enough, Jalen Tyson played at Texas Tech too.
That's the one. Yeah, that's it.
Yep,
Like I was going through that and looking at some of the older numbers for those guys. Actually, looking at it for Jalen Tyson because
yeah,
his context at Cal was like 30% usage rate, very very high volume, not super efficient, but he's been a quality role player at other places.
yep, definitely. Yeah, those Texas Tech teams were stacked back in the day.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know how they didn't win a national championship, but yeah, with McCullough, like at Kansas this year, like their spacing was horrible.
yeah,
Um, they had a really bad spacing there, and Bill Self even admitted he was like, "This is not my best team," basically. He was like, "We're recruiting." At the end of the year, he was like, "We're recruiting for next year," and like the games are still going on, which is pretty funny.
damn.
Um, yeah, it was. But McCullough, he was out in the tournament. He didn't play, so like I guess
Yeah,
that was kind of like the end there. But yeah, McCullough's a guy who I really like as 6'7" wing, really good defender. Um, really great team defender, like probably the best team wing defender in the class, in my opinion. 33% from three. Obviously, the number is not great, but he has made improvements to his jump shot, especially the form looks a lot better. Um, I just think as a two-way guy, like being a good defender and he could play make as well, like a really good passer. He had a triple double this year too. Um, he's a guy who could kind of create offense for himself. And I think the theme, right, for these players that you've done a great job highlighting in your article is about can you play with Murray, but can you also play off the bench, and kind of like create a little bit for yourself? And I think
right.
McCullar Newton is a guy who could get to really good free throw rate as well. Like these guys are really good at getting into the paint, and putting pressure on a defense. And like the Nuggets just didn't have that guy this year because Bruce was gone. And I think there's a lot of options like at 28, if Holmes off the board, but I think McCullar would be a really great fit. He was a really good passing wing, but also too is a good team defender. And his offense is gonna have to, like meet the defense at a certain point in order for him to be playable. But I think McCullough is gonna return rotation value, wherever he gets picked.
Reminds me a lot of Bruce Brown. I
Yep,
tweeted that out today.
I saw you
It
wrote that in your
makes
article too.
Yeah, it just makes sense when you've got a guy. Okay, he's not going to be a great shooter. He's not going to be an outside guy, but he can do a bunch of different things. He's very versatile. He's smart. He knows how to fit in. Like that's the kind of mold that you're looking for if you're Denver. You need somebody who can connect a little bit. And because Denver's got the talent, it's just about making sure that some of those lineups, especially without Jokic, don't just fall off a cliff. So
Right.
I think that he could absolutely do that. Whether any of these other guys could really do it, who knows? Shireman, I think, is one of those guys that if you didn't have Julian Strother, then it probably makes a little bit more sense.
Right.
I just don't really understand the need for both of those guys on the roster developing at the same time. Tyson is interesting because he's like a bully ball kind of guy that you could
Yep.
take advantage of some of the smaller guards that he might face in the NBA. But if that's kind of the limit to what he can do, then I'm not sure if I would go that direction.
Yeah. No, I actually really like Jalen Tyson's game. Yeah, Cal this year, he was basically like the point guard.
Right.
Um, which was pretty funny. But yeah, he had like a really high usage rate. Um, and his like the surrounding players on his team were uh not really like great shooters. He didn't really even have like too good of a lob threat either. So it's kind of tough in that aspect. And yeah, really good playmaker for a wing. Like at Texas Tech, he was more like an off ball player. And Cali kind of shifted his game to playing a lot more on the ball, more usage. Pretty good shooter. Can get into the paint. And the defense is like hit or miss, I would say. Like that's why I like McCullar a bit more, because I think defensively at least you're going to get that from him.
Sure.
With Tyson, I think the offense, could be interesting. Like I said, I think he could play with Murray, right? Like as an off ball guard, he could create for himself. But he's really good in the pick and roll. Finding skip passes and lobs too.
Yeah.
I really like Tyson's game. I have a first round grade on him. And at 6'7", like finding an off ball wing like that could play a little bit more on the ball. And especially too, if you factor in with Jokic as well, I think that he's like a unique circumstance where you could play a bigger wing next to him. You don't have to necessarily be a point guard, but if you have playmaking skills, I think it could work. We kind of saw that this year. Like even Christian Brown was playing point guard, and it somehow worked at times.
So no, like it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like that, and that's the good thing about having Jokic is you can fit in a lot of these different names. I could see them making it work with any of them. It's just about finding the best possible match and doing what you can to get the guy that pops a little bit more than the others. But whether that's Tyson, whether that's McCullar, whether that's any other name that we may or may not have mentioned, is there a guy that you think that we didn't mention that probably deserves it in this range?
Let me see if I can find one more guy. I think we probably hit on everybody. I know Ryan Dunn is a pretty big popular name. I think there'd be a lot of overlap too with Peyton Watson, on the roster. I defensively though, he's a game changer. As a wing, really great rim. He could protect the rim like as a wing. You could put him on an opposing wing as well, and he could lock them down. But the offense is just really, really tough. It's just not. It's gonna be that's a swing skill, obviously, but if he can even shoot one three a game to make, I think that'd be a difference maker for him. Probably too. Let me see another guy, Jonathan Mogbo from San Fran. He's another interesting name. I know he worked out for Denver. I saw. He's like an undersized big, but he's got really, really interesting flashes. As a playmaker at that size. Can't really shoot that well, but really good decision maker in the short roll. Another guy like DaRon, where you can kind of use him as a ball handler as well. Aside from a roller, but he got a great motor. Good finisher at the rim too. Just a little bit undersized in that aspect, but I wonder if it could work in a backup role, just kind of being like a unique kind of skill set. But as a guy you can kind of use in transition, and pretty good defender as well.
Going to write about him tomorrow. Going to write about, in my power forwards article, Tyler Smith, Bobby Klintman, Kashad Johnson from Arizona, and Enrique Freeman, who popping up these draft boards, man. That's it's interesting to see somebody like that. So we'll see what those guys ultimately become. I don't expect Denver to draft a power forward. I actually think it's probably their least important need right now, which is fascinating.
Yep.
Because you're just going to play Porter, Gordon, and Vlatko, hopefully, and probably Peyton Watson. So hopefully we get those guys back out there. That'll be a lot of fun. What do you think actually happens? What's your big prediction for what happens next week?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure at the moment which way it's going to go, because I know Booth, it seems like he really likes the draft. And he's kind of committed to the plan, as far as adding some as much young guys as possible to the roster. I would say that there's 2 picks made. I would say 28 is the pick. If Holmes is on the board at 25 or so, maybe they trade up with something to get him. I don't know if Zeke or Reggie is going to be traded by then. Is Reggie's option before?
Reggie's option is the 25th of June, so it is the day before.
Okay, so the day before the draft. So if he technically opts in, then you could trade him the next day, right? So
I think so.
I think maybe in that aspect, if they decide to trade Zeke, and there's a whole bunch of other the second apron stuff, which I'm not up to date on really. I've been trying to follow along, but I'm
still trying to figure it out. I'm doing my best. I'm doing my darndest, man. It is really difficult.
You've been on the case there, but yeah, I would say they pick at 28. If Holmes is not on the board, I'm curious to see who they go with. Maybe they go with Filipowski. I don't know if he worked out for Denver. I didn't see anything regarding that. Maybe they go with a guard. Maybe they go with Mitchell or Newton, or maybe if they trade back and see if they can pick up additional asset to draft a Newton or a Mitchell or a McCullar or somebody like that. I would think they probably draft one of the players and then maybe they sign like you said, the second rounder to a two-way. I think that makes more sense, especially with Gillespie. I think is a free agent this summer, so maybe that kind of frees up a roster spot there.
Well, we will see what happens, man. I am very excited to be able to cover it all with you. We'll talk plenty more going forward about what this is gonna what all is gonna go down for the draft. I know this is your Super Bowl, this is your time, and between this and between free agency, where Denver has to find a way to bring back KCP and also get better, this is going to be a pretty tough time. So it's going to be interesting to see how Denver handles it. But I think everybody should have faith in Calvin Booth making it happen, and we'll see what they can do. But he is CTFazio 24 on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Dude, thank you so much for popping in. Got anything going on that you want to advertise to the people?
Yeah, no, first off, thanks for having me on, Ryan. Appreciate it. 3 years in the running now. So it's been great to join and talk draft and Nuggets with you. Yeah, actually tomorrow night we have a draft Twitter space going on. Me and a couple of the draft Twitter guys got a general space going on. I think we're actually gonna talk a little bit Nuggets too at the beginning of the show. Kind of see what the other draft guys have to say about what Denver's got going on. And then maybe I'll have an article out next week. I've been talking with some of the Upside Swings guys over there, so I might have something published with them. But yeah, just for now, just gonna keep tweeting about the draft. And so I have a big board out tomorrow as well. So that's a pretty big update. Got my big board coming out tomorrow. Could be a final one. It's definitely like a V3, I think. So, but updated big board out tomorrow. That's the big one.
I'm looking forward to reading it. Should be a lot of fun. Everybody go follow CTFazio 24. Absolutely killing it on the draft. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button on the way out. I'll talk to you guys very soon.